Michelle's trying.
Quick.
Good morning. Ken. I don't even know when he came back.
Yes,
I know more will be coming, but let's get going. We have such a distinguished and illustrious teacher today that I don't want to delay you any longer.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thank you for coming. I don't think we have any visitors except, my friends, student, Jensen and.
Jerry's got a visitor.
Or Chad or
Jerry's got a visitor. Jerry's got a visitor.
Oh, I'm sorry. And who are you, ma'am?
Carolyn Marshall.
Oh, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. Morning, do you have something to say?
I was going to give you her name.
Yeah. Well, welcome. Oh, I think I missed it. But, we'll get started. Marge is not here. You probably noticed that. We'll welcome our folks on Zoom. Whoever this guy is. If I came to, oh yeah, there we go over here. Thanks for zooming in. We appreciate it.
Danny's son.
I don't think we have anything else to tell you, except that Doug will be teaching next week via Zoom. Now, the first 2 weekends of September, he'll be here in person. So, we'll talk to, we said we want to have another potluck. That was a big hit a few months ago when we did that. And I'm all for it, because I don't have to do anything. So, we'll talk about that with Doug here, the first 2 weekends of September. So with that said, Roy, would you have our first?
Loving Father in heaven, it is a joy to come and worship Sabbath day. And we ask that we worship in spirit and truth, and that we have the heart that we study today, care for all of others. We ask you to be with us.
This is a discussion class. We want you to speak up and raise your hand if you want to comment. Keep your comment brief, please. And do talk to us. And that's important that we hear from you. Please raise your hand if you have a comment. Thank you.
Morning. Morning. I want to start out just a little bit differently morning than what I usually do. Just give you an idea as to how I try to frame this hour we have together. And I think it's very similar to what the other instructors do too. We usually start out, and this will be no exception, with a question. And a question we pose to the group. We hope that that question generates discussion and gets you thinking. But it also does something else. It tries to create a context for what we're going to be talking about. And this is really important. And it's very difficult because there's different, you're going to come up with a different context for a story than I will. We got to try to take ourselves back into the place where it was written so we can try to understand what is being said. And then we got to travel thousands of years ahead to our current life. And somehow those dots have to be connected, and it is difficult. It can be sometimes quite controversial because where you came from is different from where I came from. If you're a physician and I'm a business person, if you are a block layer and I am a, what have you, a dentist, we come from different places. So our context could land differently, which allows for disagreement. And if we understand that that's where it comes from, then we have more empathy with the disagreement. And in fact, sometimes that disagreement makes us all better. As long as we understand we come from different places. And so I have to try to put myself in the context of you and you with me, and there we come together. Finally come together in a world that has a difficult time doing that these days. Now, I approached this lesson with an agenda. And I changed that agenda late last night. I mean, it's very easy when you study Lydia that you talk about women leadership and how that environment was then. How could this woman become a leader? And how do we approach women leadership today? Controversial. Can be controversial. But I kind of changed that. I came in with preconceived notions that had to be adjusted. So I want you all to understand that in that context, where I'm coming from. And where I'm coming from is different than where anybody else is coming from. It belongs to me. But I have to respect you. And if you respect me, our differences are wonderful. They make us more robust. And we're all better for that. So we may enter that controversy this morning. We'll see where this discussion goes. And I will enter into it if it fits. So my first question, in the spirit of getting things going and in the spirit of context. Have you ever felt discriminated against? Treated unfairly? Simply discounted as a person? And how did that make you feel? I'll give two quick examples. One I've given before. My brother, David, who's done really well in his life, although it started out real bumpy, was not a very good student. And in 4th grade, his teacher was Mrs. Schultz. And David didn't do well under Mrs. Schultz. Well, 2 years later, his brother, me, enters Mrs. Schultz's classroom. And now I look back at it and I see what happened. Mrs. Schultz expected nothing more from me than what my brother gave. So I was definitely prejudged. Mrs. Schultz gave me, in fact, I've told this story before, a D in citizenship. At the time, I didn't think I deserved it, but actually, when I think about it, when Debbie won 3rd place in the science fair, I thought her display stunk. Mine was much better, so I just picked up the ribbon and put it on mine. Hence my D in citizenship. Now, Mrs. Carney, my 5th grade teacher, also had my brother. She didn't do that. I ended up being George Washington in the class play. I excelled. I won the citizenship award in 5th grade and was given it in front of my mother. I didn't switch it around. I really won it. And so I was really proud of myself. I remember in 7th grade, I went out for the football team. Mr. Fisher was the coach. We were 0-7 that year in my 7th grade football team, and I didn't play 1 second of one game. We're 0-7. Now I look back at it and I think, what an idiot Mr. Fisher was. I mean, I'm in 7th grade, for gosh sakes. You know, we're 0-7. You know, come on, no. There's some right down on my head. I remember the last minute of the very last game, we were getting just shellacked again. And he yells out, Cosgrove, Black. Jimmy Black was a little boy, lived down the street from me. He had never played either. We run up next to him, put my helmet on. I'm really nervous. Saw the clock tick down and I never got in the game. Oh, no. And I walked across that field and I said to myself, I wasn't crying, but I was crying. I see my dad drive away, went to every game. I said to myself, this is never going to happen to me again. And after football, what's the next season? Basketball. I became a basketball player. I became a basketball player. And that never happened to me again because of that experience. What about you? Have you ever felt disenfranchised? demeaned, judged for things that you just had no control over. Anybody ever happened? Has that ever happened to anybody yet, Jerry?
I taught in Keene, Texas, 8 years. And it was our church private school. And I had one parent that was challenge for me. And one day she ran across, came in contact out on the streets of Keene in the business section. And she said, Jerry, I know why you always wear white. Okay, tell me. She said, well, that's to cover up your black heart. Ooh.
Feel sorry for her. Anything come to mind? Yeah, Gordon.
In another life, I was on a trip to one of the Caribbean islands, and I didn't know it at the time, but the local folks there were very prejudiced, and we were trying to get my daughter's hair done. And we went up to this lady, and she said, "Don't do white people, go away." Very strange feeling. I'm not used to that.
I gotta tell you, I was running a large financial operation out of Savannah, Georgia, the southeast coast. And, but I headquartered it in Savannah. Anybody ever been to Savannah? Visited? A nice place? Lived there. Give it a try. This northern boy going down in Savannah, Georgia. It was tough. And they sure tried to get to me. They tried to get to me through my children. I mean, it was really tough. You know, how do I get it. How do I handle that, Ken?
This happened in college. We were allowed to have some cars, and I had a car that year, living with a roommate who also had a car. But he decided one day that he was going to take my car with his girlfriend and go off for the part of the day, Flat River. Well, that worked okay for him. Except the dean of the Ben's dean used to go out and feel the tailpipes of our cars to see if we'd been out driving them when we weren't supposed to. Well,
Sounds like West Point. I'm sorry.
so my tailpipe was hot, warm when he checked, and he blamed me for it. And I totally lost respect for that dean thereafter. He would not acquiesce at all that taken without my permission. He'll blame me.
Sir.
I'm thinking during COVID, some of us didn't take the shot, and there was definitely some discrimination there, especially if you were married into a medical family.
That's a great example. Great.
A young man was on a trip to Spain. I hated it. I don't know if it was a cruise or, I don't know what it was, but I was miserable. I don't even know what city was I in, but I couldn't get anything worth eating. And so I ordered a hamburger. Sure enough, there was a hair in my hamburger when I finally got it. So I complained to the owner.
That went well.
And he was acting like he couldn't speak English, so I'm trying to tell him there's a hair. Well, the word for hair and dog in Spanish are very, very close, those that speak Spanish. So basically I said, there's a dog in my hamburger. So he said, he grabbed a baseball bat and he could speak. You Americans are all the same.
Yeah.
You think you're this, and so I knew I said, okay, so you're a communist, right? Yeah, I get it. You're a communist. Makes sense. So that's when he grabbed the baseball bat. And I don't remember much after that.
Yeah, right.
I was thinking about when I got out of the army, went back to college and how difficult it was and striving to be the best classes. We had Chinese students there that were coming into the country as well knowledgeable students, and I could never overcome them in terms of my grade versus their grade. So I struggled a lot, and then we became friends and we started studying together. And I excelled in that process. So being able to be friendly and not adversity is really a big difference.
You see, what's interesting about this discussion is I'm thinking about, well, who discriminated against me? But now if I flip this around, and we don't need to get into this, but it's worth a thought, now you're looking in the mirror. And where have I been guilty of discriminating against someone else? It's not about that person. That's a nice therapy discussion. Where you get real value is when you look at yourself and think, what are the lessons? We've all made decisions that if we had it to do over again, we would have done something different. No problem. It's just worth thinking about. And when you come out of the service, you have a framed idea of what someone should and shouldn't be. At least I did. You know, I won't get into that. But and it affected my performance probably not well as a leader. So I want to read a piece of our scripture that we're studying. I'm going to do it in 3 chunks. And I want to continue to provide context for what we need to talk about today. Scripture is going to come from Acts 16, and I'm going to first read Acts 16, 6 through 15. This is about Paul's travel. And we all know Luke wrote Acts. And Luke, in fact, was an eyewitness to some of it. Paul and his companions, this is starting with 16, verse 6 through 15. Paul and his companions traveled through the region, and I'm going to mispronounce some of this stuff, of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. When they came to the border of Mysia, they tried to enter Bithynia, but the Spirit of Jesus would not allow them to. So they passed by Mysia and went down to Troas. During the night, Paul had a vision of a man in Macedonia, standing and begging him, come over to Macedonia and help us. After Paul had seen the vision, we got ready at once to leave Macedonia, concluding that God had called us to preach the gospel to them. Notice he says we got up. That gives me evidence that Luke actually was with him. From Troas, we put out to sea and sailed straight to Samothrace, and the next day to Neapolis. From there, we traveled to Philippi, a Roman colony and the leading city of that district of Macedonia, and we stayed there several days. On the Sabbath, we went outside the city gate to the river, where we expected to find a place of prayer. We sat down and began to speak to the women who had gathered there. One of those listening was a woman named Lydia, a dealer of purple cloth from the city of Tyre, who was a worshiper of God. The Lord opened up her heart to respond to Paul's message. She and the members of her household were baptized. She invited us into her home. If you consider me a believer in the Lord, she said, come stay at my house, and she persuaded us. How many times is Lydia mentioned in the Bible? Set up question. Twice. 2 times. That's all. And so but there's been a lot of study about Lydia. We're going to spend an hour talking about Lydia. Mentioned twice. So there's a lot of context that needs to be pulled out of this. Because there's a lot of content there, though she's only mentioned twice. Let's try to get some of that context. All right, first of all, Luke, there's evidence here that Luke did join Paul and Silas during this time. By the way, I'm going to get some context here, but you can feel free to add to it. Philippi was a key city in Macedonia. That's northern Greece in today's concept. During this visit, it'll come to pass that Paul founded a church during the visit, and Rader wrote to that church in a letter, hence Philippians. Inscribed on the arches of Philippi was a restriction on bringing an unrecognized religion in the city. Hence, prayer meetings were held outside the city. Again, Lydia is mentioned twice in the Bible, but it's mentioned. There's a lot of people that are mentioned in Scripture, but not by name. Lydia was mentioned by name. That, in my mind, means relevancy more than not. She was a successful businesswoman. How many successful businesswomen do you think there were in this day?
Close to none.
Kind of zero, like they weren't even allowed to earn a living sometimes, almost all the time. But she became successful. She was in the purple textile industry. What does that mean?
Royalty.
Royalty.
Royalty
What?
buys it.
Pardon me?
Royalty buys purple because it's very expensive to make it. Only they can afford it.
How do you make purple?
Dye a certain berry that's rare or something.
See, I asked that, I didn't know the answer to that question. That's why I asked it. I found out. Yeah.
Mollusks.
Mollusks, like shells,
Yes.
they have to pulverize shells, like seashells. That's where it comes from. That's why I mean, a bunch of shells makes this much purple.
When we studied this a few years ago, I had a lesson, and I was stunned at how many shells it took to make like a little container of, I mean, it took hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them just to get this much dye. So it was pretty intense.
And then hence, it was so valuable, and the wealthy wanted it, so the wealthy bought it, because they had the money. Lydia apparently owned her own household. She had a staff, built her own house. Come to my house. Yes, ma'am.
My research yesterday, it said a lot of scholars. It had been her husband's business, and when he died, he was able to keep. I don't know. That's-
See, I mean, actually, there's theory here. It's not mentioned. I
Exactly.
mean, we don't know if she had children. We don't know if she was married. We don't know that, but there's theory out there. And I read that also. But it concluded with, we really don't know. Yeah.
Just a little side note, it was illegal in those days for a woman to inherit anything from her husband. It could only go to her son or his brother. And that's why you had to have a son, so that if your husband died, you live with your son. So that's kind of a conundrum how she'd be able to pull that off.
Yeah, I don't know. You know, again, I mean, we learned that when we studied Ruth, and with Boaz. You know, I mean, fair enough. Yes, ma'am.
That would have been the laws of the Jewish. This would not have been in the Jewish. This would have been more what the Greek society or the Greek culture would or wouldn't have.
See, that makes it very interesting because this was the first, theologically, a theory, this was the first Christian that accepted Christ in Europe. This was the first church. And so, he also had stated that the Lord opened her heart. It's not a theory, it's stated here. The Lord opened her heart. First Christian convert in Europe, Asia Minor. She was baptized with her household. She was a woman of God. Now, we can get into an hour-long discussion of what that means, and I don't want to. But it states here, she's a woman of God. So what Paul introduced her to was Jesus Christ. How is Lydia different from the other women of her time? Well, we've covered some of them. You know, I don't know if they were prohibited from working in the inheritance discussion, but there's not much doubt in my mind anyway that women were discriminated against. It's a sensitive issue with me and with some of you. I mean, I have 2 daughters. I have a daughter that left a major firm because of being discriminated against, founded her own business, and that fortunately has exploded. But it was in the face of discrimination. How was women's success measured during those times?
How many sons you bore?
Sons,
How many sons you bore?
husbands, it was that. They didn't give much credit for their own skill. Women were property. And they did not own property. They were property.
They were that way in this country for a long time.
Well, I mean, again, that's a place that I was gonna move into, but I'm gonna hesitate right now. Because it's still, we can still talk about how that exists now. But we might get to that, depending on how the conversation goes. Yes, ma'am.
They were also used as to settle feuds, like when, in Sodom and Gomorrah, when the evil men were trying to break down the door so they could rape the angels that they thought were humans. Says, don't do this, that's an evil thing. Here, take my virgin daughters and rape them instead.
Well, yeah, that's what happened. David Smith talked about that last week, where for those who weren't there, it was a gruesome story. People show up at the door and says, we want to rape your guest. And the man, the owner of the building says, don't rape my guest, I'll protect him. Here, take my concubine. Killed her.
Their daughter, I thought it was his daughters.
It wasn't. I thought it was a daughter too. When I read it again, it was a concubine.
There's 2 stories. There's 2 different stories.
I don't want to get into that. There are, just a second, there's people in this room that are much smarter at this than I am, I can tell you, but go ahead, finish.
She was talking about Lot. It was, he offered his daughters, but then this story in Judges, it was a concubine.
Concubine.
So you're both correct.
I'm seldom right in these discussions. All right, why did Paul preach to Lydia? Why did he do it?
He didn't preach just to Lydia. He was talking to the whole group of
He
women.
had a group of women. All right, well, I'll rephrase the question. Why did Paul preach to these women?
He was told to go there.
He was told to go there, and so he went there. And there he is. So why did he preach to these women?
He was smart.
Fair enough.
Is that all?
Yes, ma'am.
The brownie point answer.
Well, as you said, they weren't allowed to have a religious in the city. And it was a Sabbath, and so he wanted to go and spend some time in prayer. And I guess when he went there, there was a group of women, so that's what he did.
I wrote down, he preached to them because they were there. That's what I wrote down, yeah.
Actually, there was no synagogue in that town. Yet, there weren't enough men there to even have a synagogue. So it says he was looking for a place of prayer. Well, he found it. And there were no men there because there just weren't that many. So this was the opportunity, and she became the first convert.
Right. You did.
I mean, that's just what I read this morning, trying to help you because I didn't read all the
And
way.
you know I need all the help I can get, yeah.
This is Acts, so Jesus has already ascended into heaven, and his very last words were, take the gospel and preach it to all the world. And people just happen to be part of all the world. Spirit probably convicted him. It's like, oh, well, they look human to me.
Yeah, he said, make disciples of all people. He didn't say make disciples of some people.
And he didn't go out of his way to say excluding women.
See, I think what came to my mind during this exchange, first of all, the other reason why Paul did it is because God put him there. I mean, this was a plan, I believe, no different than me standing in front of you right now. These are not my words. But I also think we need to understand that Paul was probably elated to do this because he had been rejected so many times until now. Think about it. If you were rejected so much and finally somebody accepted you, you would probably be engraved too to it. Yeah. There
everyone, all the scholars think she was Jewish. And a Jew, obviously accepted what he was saying, which was a great help to
Sure,
him.
you bet. Well, this will be the first church. We will make an argument, theory, that church of Philippi started in Lydia's home. Yeah.
And then I read last night that was interesting. Some say that she was not a native of Greece, that her name is actually related to a city in Turkey. She may have learned about the Jewish faith, or she emigrated from Turkey to Greece.
I know. Okay, so we went through this discussion because I want to get some context here. Again, this is all building to what we're trying to get a common ground to deal with. I'm going to read now Acts 16 through 37, which kind of changes the course of the discussion. 16 through 37. Once when we were going to the place of prayer, we were met by a slave girl who had us. Now remember, this is Luke with Paul. A slave girl who had a spirit by which she predicted the future. She earned a great deal of money from her owners by fortune telling. This girl followed Paul and the rest of us, shouting, "These men are servants of the Most High God who are telling you the way to be saved." She kept this up for many days. Finally, Paul became so troubled that he turned around and said to the spirit, "In the name of Jesus Christ, I command you to come out of her." At that moment, the spirit left her. When the owners of the slave girl realized that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace to face the authorities. They brought them before the magistrates and said, "These men are Jews and are throwing our city into an uproar by advocating customs unlawful for us Romans to accept or practice." The crowd joined in the attack against Paul and Silas, and the magistrate ordered them to be stripped and beaten. After they had been severely flogged, they were thrown into prison, and the jailer was commanded to guard them carefully. This was not a good day for Paul and Silas. Upon receiving such orders, he put them in the inner cell and fastened their feet in the stocks. Why did he do so much to hold them back? Answer is because if he allowed them to escape, he would be put to death. About midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God, and the other prisoners were listening to them. Suddenly, there was such a violent earthquake that the foundations of the prison were shaken. At once, all the prison doors flew open, and everybody's chains came loose. The jailer woke up, and when he saw the prison doors open, he drew his sword and was about to kill himself because he thought the prisoners had escaped. But Paul shouted, "Don't harm yourself. We are all here." The jailer called for lights, rushed in, and fell trembling before Paul and Silas. He then brought them out and asked, "Sir, what must I do to be saved?" They replied, "Believe in the Lord Jesus and you will be saved, you and your household." Then they spoke the word of the Lord to him and to all the others in the house. At that hour of the night, the jailer took them and washed their wounds. Then immediately he and all his family were baptized. The jailer brought them into the house and set a meal before them. He was filled with joy because he had come to believe in God, he and his whole family. When it was daylight, the magistrates sent their officers to the jailer with the order, "Release those men." The jailer told Paul, "The magistrates had ordered that you and Silas be released. Now you can leave. Go in peace." But Paul said to the officers, "They beat us publicly without trial, even though we are Roman citizens, and threw us into prison. And now, do they want to get rid of us quietly? No. Let themselves come and escort us." Now, Paul's preaching. He's preached to Lydia, he's probably preached to the slave girl, and now he's preaching to the jailer. So I reflected on this. Why in the world, why did this happen? How did this happen? And again, I look back on my life and how I can relate and what are some of the things that if I had it to do over again, I would change. A short story, and I'm telling you this short story because I want you to think about your own life and learn from it. I was running a major complex for Merrill Lynch and I headquartered it out of Chattanooga. That's how I came here. From Savannah here. Glad to come here. By the way. Bob Corker, when he was mayor, came to me and said, would you sponsor this event, Wine Over Water? Anybody hear that before here?
Whenever water.
Wine Over Water. It's on Market Street. You pay a bunch of money, they give you a wine glass, you walk across this bridge and they give you a bunch of cheap wine to drink. After about 3 glasses of this cheap wine, you don't taste it anyway. And anyway, people buy wine. All the money went to the development of the downtown. But the thing is, you see, he has a major sponsor. The night before, Friday night, was the big party. That's where the expensive wine was. I got all these tickets and I gave them all to my financial advisors and their clients. And they all came and we developed relationships and everything went really well. And everybody thought I was just a wonderful philanthropic guy and everybody wanted to be my friend. Oh, because I did such a wonderful thing. It wasn't my money, by the way, it was Merrill Lynch's money. So I thought about this. You know, I have no idea where that money went that I gave. It went to the development of the downtown, but I didn't know because I didn't ask, because I didn't care. I was generating revenue for my firm. I was cementing the relationships I had with my employees. And so that was my purpose. I didn't go to other business leaders in town, financial business leaders, and say, let's do this together. We can even put more money in it. Let's think about what we're doing here. I didn't go to the YMCA, which I was on the board of. Didn't go to them and say, let's get the young adults together that join here and try to develop leadership development. What about an entrepreneurial program for new businesses around here? We could contribute to that. Missed opportunity, missed opportunity, missed opportunity. Because I didn't put myself in the place to do it. Paul put himself in the place where he could do it. And he recognized it. It makes me again think about who I maybe have disenfranchised. Who maybe I should have touched. And I didn't do it because I just wasn't looking. I just wasn't seeking. That was my lesson in studying this. So I want everybody, it's good thoughts to reflect on the past, not to be critical, but to be educational, to learn, so we can do better. What did Paul learn from Lydia? What did Paul learn from Lydia, do you think? Lydia invited him to her home. Lydia accepted this word. Yeah, Gordon.
Well, the thought came to me that Lydia demonstrated that God's direction for him to go there pay off.
Sure.
He didn't go somewhere else where he wanted to go. Probably would have failed.
Well, I think when he had that dream to go to Macedonia, I think he may have been relieved. Finally, I got a signal where I'm supposed to go. It was concrete. Macedonia is a place. Let's pack. Because this isn't working, you know? That's what I'd be thinking, yeah.
When I taught this lesson years ago, I felt it was a disaster. And after halfway through, Leon was sitting here. Leon, would you come up here?
You need to get bailed out.
And I said, tell me your thoughts on Lydia. Took over the class and it was one of the most amazing 20 minutes. That I believe that Lydia's generosity to the neighborhood to her friends is what impressed Paul, and it taught Paul patience.
Very. See, you're going exactly the direction I was going in that what I, after studying this, what I got from it, one of the things was Lydia knew how to allocate her resources in a holy way. She opened her house. Lydia's gonna be mentioned again. The other lesson I got from this was that I have to put myself sometimes in a position to be surprised. Paul preached to Lydia because she was there, or to the group. But all of a sudden Lydia gets up and says, come into my home. I'll bet you Paul was surprised. But it wouldn't have happened if he didn't preach. And he wouldn't have stayed in Lydia's home. And the Church of Philippi may have not even evolved if those things hadn't happened. Little things turn into big things. They can happen with each one of us. Yes, Jerry.
So to reiterate what you just said and to tie it to your beginning talk about being prejudged by your brother, thinking Paul probably had preconceptions as to what a woman's role was. And he was completely surprised and shocked and completely taken unawares of her offer. How far it would go. So I think the lesson is to not prejudge. Don't make assumptions about people.
Careful.
Don't judge a book by its cover type of. I think that's the lesson, is that here is a person that should never have any power. Wield it, this power and influence
Yeah.
in the church and the community.
Mrs. Schultz wasn't surprised. She got exactly what she was thinking. Mrs. Carney opened up her mind and she got surprised. This kid isn't as bad as what they thought he was. That's right, yeah.
And I think, he has this vision and like kind of to that end, he's like, oh, so is this who you wanted me to come for? Is this group, this gathering? And I think, you have sometimes in your life, like, was this what it was for? Like, is this what you want me to do? And he might have had the temptation to look around and say, what else? This isn't important enough. Why did you call me out to come here to do this? Yeah, he doesn't.
He doesn't.
Which I think is kind of the magic of the story.
God does that repeatedly.
Huh?
God does that repeatedly. Calls the people that everybody else says, no way, overlooks. Look at David.
Sure.
Look at God coming to women first when he rises from the dead. It's just the people that we overlook.
See, one of the questions I would have was when you felt disenfranchised, when you felt like you were devalued, who was it that walked along and lifted you up? When have I lifted you?
Lydia was searching. She wasn't happy with all the money she made and everything. Went to that prayer, brought her friends. Probably was telling them she wasn't really happy with life.
I think so too. And I think it comes back to my resources, like, I have this wealth, I have this household, so what? What am I, now she begins some traction. Right, it's not, this is a good lesson for us. Not how much money you got. How you use what you got. How you use the resources. Great. Sure.
Okay. Story intrigues me as I've compared and contrasted the two women that are present, Lydia and no name. I call her Diva Damsel, but no name. She has no name. And they both meet at a place of prayer, but one invites them home with them. The other one just follows them and chants. One has a name, one has a ministry, and one has a purpose. The other one is handing over her money to other people. And it's just two different wins, same.
We're gonna get, no, you're not getting ahead, that's fine, but there's holy vocations here in a second. So you're there. So the next question I have is, what did Lydia learn from Paul? Easy one. Yeah.
Messiah.
Saw someone that
All right, so I'm gonna restate what you said, because I came up with it too. Paul taught Lydia how to teach, how to expand where she was. I believe that was part of it. There's somebody else? I think also Paul taught Lydia, as it says here, that Jesus Christ is your Savior. And opened up, she was already opened up to God, but she was opened up to Jesus Christ.
I think Lydia probably, if her whole household was willing, she must have treated them well, helped them, took care of them, looked after them, made sure that they were taken care of. So God worked on somebody that he already knew. Thinking of what she was already doing for the people that were working for her.
See, to follow up with what you just said, I think Lydia had a lot, I'm a student of leadership, which some of you know. She had a lot of solid traits and principles of leadership. What Paul did, expanded those skills to help her understand what it will take to lead a church. And one of the examples that Paul gave, not from what he said, but what he did, Paul was a tough guy. Paul endured a lot. I mean, he was in prison with shackles, earthquake, after he'd been beaten. And now he's let go. I bet you the boy's pretty tired. I bet you he could use a nap, And so where did he go? He went to Lydia's house, and Lydia sees these people come in saying, man, these folks have some mettle about themselves. That's sometimes what it takes. What
I was gonna say is, to me, you see elements of life. Lydia, I think she was a Gentile, and yet she was like a Christian, even though there was no Christianity at that point in time. And what God is doing is giving Paul an opportunity to see the broad picture of what his work was all about. It wasn't just going to the Jews because they always went to the synagogue.
See, I know that there's some people, and some of you say this, landed where Lydia was Jewish. I didn't land there. I landed her as a Gentile, right, when I was studying this.
She was in Turkey.
Sure. And and so what this did, this really expanded Paul's world. This was a bigger world. And of course, it is a bigger world. So what do I learn from Lydia's and Paul's story here? And I want you to think about this so we can focus our discussion here on your vocations. Let me tell you a short story. Has anybody had any experience or studied the business practices of the Turkish monks? Probably no.
Just yesterday.
Well, actually, there's a Mimkin Abbey in South Carolina. And I've told some of you this story before. And it's run by these Turkish monks. And what they do is they'll invite people there to live with them. And what they do is they teach their business practices. See, they owned a chicken farm. And chickens produced eggs. And they were well known for the wonderful eggs they produced. Stores would come from all over, pay a premium price to buy these eggs from this abbey because they were such high quality. And the monks did what monks do. They worked in the chicken business for 4 hours a day, and then they slept for 4 hours, ate for a couple hours, prayed the rest of it, I mean, but they rotated through and it was extremely successful. One Friday morning, they get up and outside the Abbey, where there was a bunch of people with signs, cruelty to chickens. It was kind of a movement, cruelty to chickens, and, this is bad. So the monks got together and said, what do we do? Well, we're gonna get out of the chicken business. And they sold all their chicken, got rid of them all. And they got into the mushroom and fertilizer business, which exploded more than the chicken business. Well, how did this happen? Well, there's studies that have been made, but basically, paradoxically, they weren't in business at all. This was just a tool to try to accomplish they were committed to a higher overarching mission of service, of selfless service. This business success was just a byproduct of their purpose. And so it makes you think about it makes me think about would I do a byproduct of something bigger than me? And so I want to get back to the allocation of resources and that story. How does Lydia allocate her resources? What are resources? Money, time, material, and intellectual capital, the gifts that you've been given. So how should I be sensitive to allocating my resources? How do I do it? How do I be the chief executive officer of a financial firm and be a missionary? Is one holier than the other? Can be. What can be the similarities there?
One can allow you to.
One what?
One can allow you to do the other.
All right, explain that more.
Well, I mean, if you're a successful businessman, you have a large business on the side of helping people. It allows you to do that because it provides you the resources.
Sure. So what's Gordon saying here? What is the similarity? How can both of these vocations be holy? How can a physician be holy and a block layer be holy?
Yeah.
Intent.
They're both providing needs to people.
They're both providing needs to people. That's right. Different needs, different perspective. I have 3 bricklayers. I go to the first bricklayer and I ask, what are you doing? He goes, I'm building a brick wall. Go to the second bricklayer. What are you doing? I'm building a church. Go to the third bricklayer. What are you doing? I'm building the house of God. They're doing the same thing. Very different reasons. By the way, on the leadership side of this, it's important that you understand what the purpose of each one is. Get that early, you'll lead more effectively. And everybody can be different. So what's a holy vocation? I think it's important when we walk out of this room, we think about that. And I don't want to hear this, oh, I'm retired, I don't have a vocation. I don't want to hear it, because that's a vocation in itself too. I just think I think Paul was surprised. I think he was inspired by his conversation with Lydia. I asked, when have you been surprised? And when should I have been surprised, but didn't put myself in a position to be? And I think intent is really important. Whoever never said that. Selfless service versus self-serving. Yeah.
That's what makes a holy vocation. Only thing that makes holy. Okay, we can.
Well, how do you do that?
Have to be
How do you, oh,
willing and allow him to open your eyes.
but listen, I'm not being critical here, but those are good words. But still, my question is relevant. How do you do that? Practical question. How do you do that?
Okay, so when I get up in the morning, I ask the Lord in my prayer to open my eyes, to allow me to see what He wants me to do, because I have had my eyes opened enough to know that compared to the majority of the people on this planet, I am filthy rich because I have food, shelter, and clothing. Just those simple things, not the fact that my refrigerator is complete and my cabinets are complete. I have over and abundantly more than what I need. So I need to go back to my, we teach our children, I have one dolly and I have two dollies and you have none, give you one. Well, that's the kind of thing I need to be, but I have to be open. My eyes have to be open to see and to see how what I have can meet that need. And the only way I can do that is in my spirit, opening my eyes.
Okay, so the way you do that, one of the practical ways of doing it, that you own, that works for you, is when you get up in the morning, you have a process that does that. I think it's important, which may be different than my process, but I need to have one. I need to have something. Yeah, Ken.
There's two key words you've mentioned. There's occupation and there's vocation. We can probably use our occupation to really support our vocation, both within our occupation, but outside of our specific occupation as well, and provide other resources and contacts, be able to have our vocation forward and do its job.
See, here's how I look at occupation and vocation. Vocation is a maturity. Bob Buford's book, Halftime. Anybody read it? I have mentioned this to you before. Bob writes this book where life is a athletic event. And it's now halftime. And we go into the locker room and we talk about what we did the first half. We talk about the things we did well, talk about things we didn't do well, the things we need to change so we can go out in the second half and win. And what you find is the first half, you did a lot of important things. It was your occupation. You accumulated some things, had some children maybe, got married, whatever, bought a house, important things. In the second half of our life, we come out and we're gonna now do significant things. Now, it's the vocation. What was the word you used, Ken? Not an occupation, it's a vocation. That's how I interpret it. Somebody else had a comment? Yes, sir.
I was thinking about our sermons the past few weeks. Pastor Jerry has urged us to, our natural inclination is what Janice said, is to, I'm gonna do this. Like, well, no, that's humanism. It's just to say, Lord, what do you want me to do? Gave me this, it's the second half. We did okay in the first half. We've accumulated. Now what am I supposed to do with it?
I'll tell you from a leadership perspective, in fact, I spoke on this past week, your brother's thing. We talked heavily about how you make decisions that are wholesome. And I know in the second half of life, you walked out of that halftime, and I hope you had a set of values that you live by. And I hope they're crisp. Mind are Christ-centered, respect for the individual, integrity, loyalty, and responsible citizenship. I can define them. I didn't have those values during Wine Over Water. If I did, I wouldn't have done it that way. I'd have done something different because I'm guided by those values. Yes, sir.
I think along the leadership line, a good leader will look around at the people around him. Because a good leader knows that they don't know everything. I know I don't know everything. So I look for people who are more squared away on some things. And I pull them into my decision making. And I think that using the good Lord to do the same thing is really the crux of it. Is I know I can't run a business, a career, whatever by myself. I'm like, I'm gonna get somebody who's smarter than me, be a partner in this, to be a partner in this decision making, to point me in the right direction. That's what I think.
See, I think so too, but we have to be careful with this. I mean, you're dead right. I'm with you. There is this soldier. And true story. There's a soldier that he wasn't a good soldier. Always had a wrinkled uniform. His shoes were not shiny. He was just a poor soldier. Didn't get promotion, was passed over. He was sent to combat. Got caught in an ambush. And we were in peril. Soldier jumps up and starts dragging people to safety. Starts pulling people in and saving their lives. He lived.
Shoes did it.
Didn't care. You don't care about you have something else you wanna,
I was just joking, he said he didn't have shiny shoes, and I said, this didn't mess up his shoes, did it?
you know?
No. I was,
I apologize. Anyway, no one, when someone handed out his hand, your hand to save your life, you don't care if that hand has shiny shoes or a wrinkled uniform or is black or is white or is purple or has blue eyes. You don't care. Because when you're in pain, and that's the essence, I think, the reason why I tell that story is that we have to look into the hearts of people when you call them in. And I think what that does is allows you the opportunity to be surprised. And I think one of the punchlines to this story is I think we need to put ourselves in places where we can be surprised, where we're not disenfranchising people. That's holy. And you can do that in any vocation. You can do it. Gordon.
You know, I started thinking about Schindler's List while we've been talking here. And, you know, you look at a situation like that, God uses all kinds of ways people to support him, take care of other people.
I think one of the, in concluding here, when I prepared for this, there are some key points that I dragged out of this for me. One of them is what we just talked about. I need to make myself more open to be surprised, which means that I need to be careful in my discriminatory behavior, be accepting. I had a conversation with a leader in this church this week. We talked about, because I didn't know if we we're going to get in the woman issue here. I asked her what she felt about women, for example, in the pulpit. And she said, makes me uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable with it. I would rather have a man in the pulpit. I'm uncomfortable with it. I said, is there anything biblically that supports that? She goes, no, not really. Just me, who I am. I'm uncomfortable with it. So if you walk into a church and you have a woman in the pulpit, you're probably not going to go to that church. She goes, that's right. We'll find another church. There's nothing wrong with that. Fair enough. We're all different. But there was never an argument whether a woman should be or shouldn't be. It's just who you are. Very interesting conversation. Of course, I was on another agenda at that time. Also, selfless service is Christ-inspired by my holy vocation. Somebody said intent of being selfless. That is part of being holy in your vocation. And I think the other thing that I was left with here is we need to respect our differences. That our differences is what makes us great. And rejecting those differences don't make it as great as what we could be, and we will not reach our potential unless we accept those differences. You know, if we can do that, we can disagree. And our disagreement makes us far more robust, far better, if we can do it in that context. Although I've always thought if the world agreed with me all the time, it'd be a much better place. But I gotta renege on that, of course. At any rate, Lydia's mentioned twice. That's all. But if you look at it in context, there's a lot of lessons that can be dragged out of this. And you, in fact, can look in the mirror and think, when I walked in this room, this is what I was thinking. But when I walked out, maybe there's something here that I can adjust and change to make me better.
John, did a lot better with Lydia than I did years ago. One thing that impressed me, and our motto is, here at this class is, we hope that you walk out of here just a little better off than when you walked in. That's our goal. One thing I wanted to share with you about John and his 0-7 football season, and never played, but maybe, I think you said 2 seconds or something.
Didn't play any, he didn't put me in, he was an idiot.
It'll come to you.
He'll come.
In college, I had to get up on Sunday morning, every Sunday, it'd be freezing outside, everyone else was asleep. And I would have to go work at my uncle's truck stop, be there at 7 o'clock and work till 7 that evening for $16 a day. And I got so sick of it, I swore to God, if I ever make it through this, I will never work on Saturday or Sunday again for the rest of my life, and I never did. And I won't. I'm not gonna do that because I just so discriminated by that, I felt. I want to sleep in. I want to go scrape the frost off my windshield ever again. So also about his inspiration, he became a good basketball player. What he won't talk about, and this really bothers me with you. He went on to be drafted by the NBA. Does everybody know what the NBA is in here? The National Basketball. So he played with my boyhood hero, Dave the Busher, Bill Bradley, Earl the Pearl Monroe, all those guys.
I practiced with him a couple times.
Yeah, he was on the bench. We won't talk about it. We discount people. I was once in a business that was sort of a schlock business, but it's what I grew up in. I tried to make a living in it. And I had to buy some, I'll get through this in a hurry. I had to buy some products from some guys that were shady, borderline crooks. And I would go to their warehouse and I would sit while this little lady handled all the accounting, everything, waiting on these two shady characters to show up. And it went on and on and on. And this lady, you have seen 1,000 times, she's short, she has overweight, she has short black hair, she wears a chain around her neck, she has her glasses, she has a mole right here with a couple of big black hairs growing out. And one day, as I was discounting her, waiting for these two characters to show up, I decided I'll at least try to make a conversation. And I said, well, Helen, I see your boss is big aerials. Nobody had an aerial back then, but they wanted to show off their farm and their new Corvettes and everything. And I said, well, do you have a big farm? And she says, and a big home. She said, no, my home's in heaven. All this time, discounted this woman. All this time, just like her boss. I thought they were just like her boss. So we get these pictures in our mind about who people are, and it's sometimes not even who they are. Sometimes we discount people. Next week, Doug will be teaching on Ananias and Sapphira, I think. I don't know if Doug's even on. No, he's not. But anyway, he'll be teaching Zoom. We look forward to seeing you again. And thank you, John, for a great lesson. And with that said, Stacy, would you have a prayer, please?
Just there's so much about you that we have yet to learn. Much growing that we have to do. Who you are. Loving us anyway. Coming to this earth to rescue. Glorious existence. Thank you so much for the scriptures so we can learn who you are. Blessing these people over the centuries. Excuse me, the millenniums. We have the Holy Spirit continue to dwell in our hearts and minds and actions the rest of our lives until we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for coming. We'll see you next week. I hope. If anybody would like to get on their email list that is not on it now, see me. Let me get your email address.